27th installment. It's been a hive of activity so far, and the hits keep on coming today. Full event when it comes to the schedule, but first things first, we saw the council on the stage yesterday, but when it comes to the guys who were in charge of bringing him to Chicago from Milwaukee, that's Jed Hoyer, Carter Hawkins, the Cubs Brain Trust, and Boog. He's catching up with the fellas right now. Let's enjoy.
All right, Cole, thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Good to be here. Day 2 here. 2024. Jed Hoyer, Carter Hawkins. How are you guys doing? Happy New Year. What's happening?
Doing great. How you doing?
Yesterday was great, huh? I mean, that was a press conference, standoff press conferences in terms of, in all seriousness, Shota Imanaga and the amount of time it must have taken to rehearse that and to deliver that. I was really impressed by it, and it gives you a little peek into his personality.
The coolest thing was that we had no idea.
Oh.
So he launches into that. I was stunned. I asked him afterwards, I said, that was the coolest thing. That must have taken you so long to do. He said, 2 hours.
Wow. So I have a little bit of background I have not actually told you yet. So his agent came up to me like 5 minutes before the press conference, and he's like, hey, Carter, is it okay if he does some funny stuff on stage? I'm like trying to think, like, what possibly could funny stuff on stage be? And I was like, Seiya said he loved Mike Trout in his opening press conference, so anything below that, I think you're fine. And he was like, okay, I think we got it. He's been practicing for 48 hours. So maybe even 2 days.
So I don't know. Okay. So you were thinking like maybe a magic show or something along those lines?
I had no idea. Yeah. And the interpreter yesterday is actually one of our value front office members who is not a professional interpreter by trade. He did unbelievable. Shingo grew up in Japan, lives in Chicago now. But yeah, he was a pro as well. So we had 2 kind of unknowns going on there, but it worked out great, and super excited to get Shota on board.
I want to bounce around for a bit, and let me just finish up in terms of Imanaga going to scout him, and hopefully give me a quick take on translating players from Japan to the majors, and maybe contrast it with translating and projecting amateur players and minor league players. What's the hook, the one thing you sit there and say, I wonder if this is going to work over here?
You know, I think with hitters, it's always about velocity. Right? The pitching here, the guys throw so much harder. That was our big concern with Seiya, was will he be able to hit velocity? So we spent a lot of time looking at that. I think with pitchers, you're looking at the workload. So you're pitching every, you're 4 days off or 5 days off, as opposed to always having 6 days off. And also the ball is different. So how is a pitcher going to adjust to the new ball? I do think with the ball, the WBC was helpful. Like we could get the pitch data from the WBC with that ball, so that helped. But I think it's probably the workload and the days off is the biggest thing you have concerns about.
We had a conversation just about that, though. And in today's world, forget about Japanese pitchers. And Craig Counsell, the last couple of years with the Brewers, they were taking Burns and Woodruff on extra rest all the time. And so now it's basically not, let's get 5 guys that'll throw 200 innings. It's we're going to cover 1,450 innings. How do we do it? So rest is, I mean, you can manage that.
Yeah, absolutely. With the off days and just if you're willing to manipulate your rotation a little bit, you have some guys that are willing to bounce around and not necessarily know exactly the day they're going to pitch each time. You're able to make sure that, especially with 1 or 2 pitchers like we talked about, get guys in the days that you want. I think as you think about translating Japanese stats, it's really similar to translating minor league stats in some ways. In some ways, it's pretty different. So we can look at all players when they go to AA. Okay, we have X stats in AA. What are they going to be in AAA? You can kind of find that coefficient, so to speak, to figure out what is the normal jump from a talent level. Similarly, you can do that with Japanese stats. You can say, okay, all players that go from Japan, with their stats in Japan, what do those stats look like when they get to the United States and get into Major League Baseball? The difference, as Jed hit on, was there's just different implements. The ball is different. They play in the domes more, things of that nature. So we can actually measure what the ball is doing in Japan for all pitchers from Japan, and then of the ones that come over to the States, what is the difference in how the ball reacts? But different hands, different people, like it's not a one-to-one correlation, not everybody is the same. So that's where that WBC piece really comes into play for a pitcher, where you not only can guess what will happen, you can say, hey, this is what actually happens to the ball with the Japanese pitcher when he uses in Major League Baseball. So those are things that are going on in the background all the time. I have a ton of people working on those things in addition to our scouts that are going out and working through it, and it's pretty fun.
When you look at an event like this, I think especially yesterday, last night, all the kids up front and people getting excited for baseball. If you grew up in a cold weather area, this time of year, people start to think, oh man, it's getting close to being warmer, it's getting close to baseball season. All right, so just rewind for me. When you were a kid, who was your team? Who was your player that you sat there and thought about and got excited about for both of you?
So a couple things. I grew up in New Hampshire, so colder than this. And back then they had writers' dinners all over the place. Right. So I remember in the winter going to the Manchester, New Hampshire writers' dinner, and they'd get like, the utility infielder, and everyone would be excited to see that guy, because that was the only player that would go to New Hampshire. But it's a little different. Favorite team was the Red Sox, obviously. That was a good era. Jim Rice, Wade Boggs, Clemens, Hurst. Those are good teams. But my favorite player as a kid was Barry Larkin. And it's a pretty good story, actually. And a story I've told to our players a lot in terms of the impact a player can make on a kid and being a fan. So I was 13 years old. My grandfather had died, and so my dad and I flew down to Florida to get my grandmother, situated and settled. And there were spring training games going on. And so my dad dropped me off at 9 in the morning at Al Lopez Field in Tampa, which, by the way, no one would ever do that today. And so he's dropped me off. He's like, meet me here, we'll come to the game or whatever. So I had like 4 hours to run around. And so I'm chatty by nature, and so I started talking to everyone. And about noon, the guy was like, hey, the bat boy didn't show up, you want me to bat boy today? And so my dad shows up with my grandmother at the game, and I'm like on the field running around getting bats. But so Larkin was a rookie at the time. It was spring of '87. He was a rookie, and he was fighting with Kurt Stillwell for the job. And I was talking to him the whole game. It was a fun team, Dave Parker and Eric Davis and Terry Francona, and Pete Rose was the manager. And so Larkin comes out of the game in the 5th inning. It was the last day of spring training. He comes out of that game, and he stays the rest of the game and talks to me, which is wild. And then after the game, I'm gonna leave. And he's like, no, come with me. So he takes me in the clubhouse and gets everyone to sign stuff for me. He signs a bat for me, and he's like, hey, come in and see Pete. So I go in and I see Pete Rose, and again, I'm like, kid from New Hampshire, I'm pretty wide-eyed. He's got diamonds everywhere. And so anyway, then I leave, and Larkin was my favorite player after that, obviously. Award number 11 in every sport after that for him. And then he ended up being a Hall of Famer. I never met him again. And then when I was at the Padres, I went to the writers' dinner in New York because Bud Black had been manager of the year, and he was introducing Votto because Votto got the MVP and Larkin had been the previous MVP. And he was awesome. They always say, don't meet your heroes, but he was amazing. So that's my sort of best player, my favorite player story. So
he's a really good guy. I got a chance to work with him a bunch at ESPN. We see him, he's an announcer now. Here's a nugget for you. Ready for this? Only guy Jim Deshaies ever hit on purpose, Barry Larkin. True story.
That's awesome.
What about for you, sir?
So my story's got a little bit more levity to it, I guess. But I was a Braves fan growing up. Grew up in Atlanta. I was 6, 7 years old in '91 and '92, right when the Braves went from worst to first. Atlanta was exploding. The Olympics were coming. There's just a lot of excitement about sports, and it was kind of at its pinnacle with the Braves. So the Ron Gants, the Terry Pendletons, the Glavins, Maddox, I know when he came over. So all of those guys I loved. But in 1993, my family went to spring training for our spring break trip down to West Palm Beach. And I would wake up every morning, reminding me, people getting autographs here, I would wake up every morning, 5 in the morning, try to beat the players at their hotel before they went to the ballpark. And so I would just hang out in the lobby all the time. And so one day I'm going up to the 5th floor of the lobby because there was a lounge up there that I was trying to catch some autographs at. And Marvin Freeman, who was a middle reliever for the Braves, was in the elevator, and so I'm like standing there, like just me and Marvin, like this is the coolest thing ever. I'm in an elevator with Marvin Freeman, and Marvin, if you're out there, yeah, this is a big moment for me. And so we're going up to the 5th floor. We get to the 2nd floor, and the door opens, and the lady outside the door says, "Are you guys going up?" And we were going up, and Marvin said, "No, we're going down." And the door closes, and Marvin looks at me and goes, "We got her!" And as a 7-year-old, I thought it was the funniest thing that's ever happened in the history of the world. And like I come back to my parents, I'm like, "Yeah, me and Marvin, we just got this woman." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" But yeah, so the small impacts Major League Baseball players can have on kids 30 years later, it's pretty fun.
That time when me and Marvin Freeman played a prank on a lady outside an elevator. So
Talk about it twice a year.
Yeah, easy. All right, let's get into it. I had proposed. It's a little early. I proposed that maybe we just, for fun, FaceTime Scott Boras up here just to see what's going on. But we're not going to do that.
Yeah, he has an Android.
He's an Android. Damn. All right, so let's. Free agents that are still out there, guys like Matt Chapman, obviously Bellinger. How do you proceed in spots like what you're looking at, offers, possibly wading into adding other guys?
Yeah, I mean, some off seasons are really fast and some are slow, and this has been a slow one. And obviously there's really good players out there. We've made a couple moves. I think we have a few more in us for sure, but you can't speed it up. I think our job is to get good deals, not to just do deals. I mean, anyone can do a deal. Anyone can say yes, to the agent's asking price. And you do that, and you're going to run out of money really quickly. And so the bet is trying to get the right deal for the organization. That's our job, is to invest Tom and the family's money as wisely as we can, and we're going to do that. So we can't speed it up, but obviously there's really good players out there, and we have to be somewhat patient.
What's your perspective on what's left out there and what needs the Cubs possibly have?
I mean, there's wins out there to add to our team, and whether that's arms, whether that's relief arms, whether that's on offense, there are wins out there. They're good players. They're good players that are free agents. They're good players that are currently on other teams' rosters. And that's our job, to try to figure out the acquisition cost for those wins and what makes the most sense, kind of what Jed was talking about. We've often talked about there's 2 types of currency. There's prospect currency or player currency, and there's dollar currency. And any good player costs either, right? So when we went and got out in Naga, that was dollar currency. When we went out and got Michael Bush and Nick Almonte, that was player currency. Both have risks. Both have significant risks. We're more than willing to take those risks on, but at the same time, we want to try to mitigate it to the best of our abilities and put the odds in our favor. So we are, every single day, we'll do it the day after this, hit the phones, talk to other teams, talk to other agents, and to Jed's point, try to find great deals to help this team win.
Run prevention was certainly a strength last year. Is an elite level defense, probably a top 6, top 7 team defense in baseball. Building a bullpen. Last year's bullpen performed well, but the anchors in that bullpen were guys like Alzolay, who had never had to go 70-ish appearances and bounce back. And the same for Mark Leiter, and the same for Julian Merriweather. When ready and healthy, they all pitched well, but down the stretch, it certainly took a toll. So what do you do this season in terms of building a bullpen?
Yeah, I mean, I thought last year, that we would get tired. It was a strange season that way. Early in the season, our bullpen was fine. We had a bad 45-day stretch sort of May and early June. The bullpen struggled, and then they struggled again in September. I think some of that was not having enough depth down there, and then some of that was the fact that we were winning every game for 3 months, and that takes a toll on the bullpen. Like I said, we didn't have the depth to get through that, and that's a big focus. Both making sure our guys that come up through the system can handle that depth, and also making sure we had that depth in free agency and trade before the season. But the game has changed so much now. It used to be that you could kind of pencil in your your rotation. We used to always talk about, can we get 950 to 1,000 innings out of the rotation? That feels like 100 years ago. You have to have so many arms to win the battle now. And it's not just about the 13 guys who pencil in. It's probably closer to 25 or 30, and the team that can get through the battle is gonna be effective now. So the game has changed, the velocity has changed, the way people pitch. I mean, talking to our new manager about it, he wants to give guys extra rest. He's not looking for guys to be pitching 170, 180 innings. He knows that 120 to 140 is probably a lot. How do we mix and match all the guys to get through the 1440 of the year? And it's a real challenge now, and I think that is where the job has changed the most. That almost every night we're talking about a roster move. Is it, are we fresh enough? Do we need to get a pitcher? That was never the case. Now it's very rare you don't use 4 and 5 pitchers in every single game, and that's not just the Cubs, that's everybody. So it's definitely a very different perspective on team building than it used to be. Even looking at 2016 when we had you just had Lester and Jake and Lackey and Hamill and Hendricks eating up so many innings. Like, no one in baseball has that anymore.
And the changes in terms of sustaining in bullpen. There was an article last year during the playoffs that was insightful about the Phillies and Dave Dombrowski putting a bullpen together and talking about trying to find elite level velocity and deciding elite level velocity is probably 97, 98 now. It's not 95. And then the other thing is, who holds their velocity for the entire season? And if the goal is to get to the playoffs, who's going to still be throwing 97, 98 come September and October? And that's one of the things you guys are responsible to trying to figure out.
Yeah, the evolution just in every aspect of the game over the last several years has just been going breakneck speed. Jed and I often kind of kid around, like similar to the velocity is no longer the guy that throws 94. It's like when your grandfather's like, hey, here's $5, go have a great meal on me. And you're like, dude, like it's costs $55 just to go to McDonald's now. So like things just have changed. You have to stay up to speed on that. I think certainly the way pitchers have been trained, the way pitchers have been deployed, it's definitely increased the intensity of each outing. And I think from an injury perspective, it's become less demonized to get hurt in some ways. That's just, hey, you get hurt and you get better and you come back and you're just as strong. So, those are things that we're obviously trying to reduce injury risk at any time, but it's also, the best way to not get hurt is just throw 70 miles an hour over the middle of the plate every time. So that doesn't work either. So it's trying to find that balance, and it's a fun challenge that all 30 teams are working through, and absolutely something we work through every day.
A couple of things before we open it up for questions. Seiya Suzuki last year, last 2 months of the season, was one of the top 10 hitters in all of baseball. We've gotten a chance to watch him over the course of 2 seasons. You mentioned coming in, the question was velocity. He showed pretty clearly the top of the zone, high level velocity. He handles it just fine. There were times where sliders that went strike to ball were an issue for him. What do you do as far as projecting what Seiya Suzuki will do this year? Is he the guy that he was in August and September? And how does that go into when you're really nerding it up and trying to project what, how many runs the team's going to score and projection on wins?
Well, ultimately when you look at a team that outproduces its expectations, you look at our projections at the beginning of the year. In order to win, the teams that go further than expected, those are always going to be teams that a couple players, they're projected for 2.5, they go to 4.5 wins, right? And so you have to expect that, and I think Seiya is one of those guys that can definitely do that. He's immensely talented. He really is. I think what we saw at the end of the year hopefully was a harbinger of things to come, where he's starting to get comfortable. Kind of a funny story, we're talking about velocity, and the struggle for him early last year and some of the time over here was just putting the ball on the ground. His exit velocities are elite. He's hitting the ball 107 miles an hour, but it's on one hop to the shortstop. And so that was kind of what he was working on. How do I get the ball in the air more, especially to the pull side? And so things started to click for him, and obviously he had a monster August and September, and he was getting the ball in the air more. And I was asking those guys, like, hey, what changed? Like, what was the big moment? And the big moment was he was struggling, and we're playing the Reds. I think it was early August, like right after the deadline. And it was one of those games, we scored like, whatever, 19, 20 runs in a couple of those games. And he was facing a position player pitching at the end of the game. And he was just like, okay, this swing nice and smooth, catch the ball in front. The guy's throwing 58 miles an hour, and he hit a huge...
You won't get hurt. Guy throwing 58 won't get hurt, by the way.
Yeah. And so he hit a long home run against a position player, and it was like, that was it. I think that's the swing, catch it out front. And from that day forward, he took off, which is great. So it's amazing when people talk about like what those moments are, that things click. It was just like thinking about catching the ball out front. And so my hope, and our hope, obviously, is that, you know, he had a year and a half to transition. It's a hard transition, but that we saw the player he can be. I do think he's got one of the best right-hand swings in baseball. He's so tooled up. Our hope is that he can really start taking off now.
All right, I got a couple more questions. If you want, start lining up, and you can get a chance to ask questions to Jed Hoyer and Carter Hawkins. Shohei Ohtani, what did you make of the way that contract played out in terms of the deferrals, and how involved were you guys?
Yeah, pretty fascinating contract, right? I mean, just the number 700. Jed talked about it last night with them. I mean, that's a pretty jarring number. Now, certainly from a time value and money standpoint, when you look at how far those payments are into the future, it's not $700 million in terms of getting that today. But a massive contract for arguably the best player of our generation, and potentially, you know, depending on how things play out, one of the best players of all time. So, you know, not surprised that the Dodgers were willing to go that far on him. And yeah, absolutely, we had a ton of interest, and we're interested in figuring out a way to make him a Cub. It didn't work out for, you know, multitude of reasons. You know, I think he just a really good fit over there in LA, obviously for them as well. And you know, we turn our sights to other opportunities. There's a lot of wins out there, like we talked about.
As far as this year's group, when you look at the rotation, how do you feel about it? Because last season, like, he's 6th in starting pitchers, ERA. Stroman's gone. Tyone, I think, in a sneaky way, finished the year strong. Probably there should be some regression to the good side for him. There was some bad luck. How do you view the rotation now with Imanaga in the fold?
Yeah, going back to the conversation before, I mean, I think we have a lot of guys I think are major league starting pitchers. I think we have a lot of depth, and you know, the hope is certainly that some of those young guys that we have will take that next step forward. I do think that, you know, talking to Craig about it, I think he's very focused on, okay, like, how do we, you know, give guys extra rest, use this depth for good. Certainly, I think there's some, I don't want to say questions, but certainly there's some, you know, variability in how that rotation produces. I do think our defense really helps that. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's a pitching run prevented or a fielding run prevented. It's all about run prevention, and I think we do a good job of that.
All right, we're going to go to questions.